Hi, everyone. We'll just give people a few more seconds to get admitted and get settled in, and we'll get started. It's great to see you all today.
Okay, let me grab that quickly.
All right. All right, I'll go ahead and get started. We have some help admitting anyone who gets on late, but hi, everyone. Welcome to Threat Multiplier, COVID and Climate Impacts on the Northern Arizona Fire Season. Really excited to welcome you to this event today. It's kind of come together as a collaboration between the Northern Arizona Climate Change Alliance, the Union of Concerned Scientists, Elders Climate Lobby, and Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Yavapai College. So thank you all for being here. We have two wonderful guest speakers that I'm so thankful for. I know they're very busy, but they have agreed to present to us today. So just for some Zoom protocols, if we could all kind of just keep our microphones muted, except during the Q&A session, we'd all appreciate it. There's, looks like most of you have it all done, so thank you. Anyone who's looking for that button, it's at the bottom left corner of your screen. There will be a Q&A session following the presentation, so throughout the presentation, you're welcome to go ahead and post your questions in the chat box if you don't want to forget about a great question you had. And that's at the bottom of your screen as well. You just click the box that says chat and you can kind of follow along in there as well. We'll also take live questions too, so you're more than welcome just to hold on to the question and we'll kind of go through at the end after we read the chat box questions, and you're more than welcome to go ahead and just ask that. So for a couple introductions before we start the presentations, my name is Jenna Ortega. I'm with the Northern Arizona Climate Change Alliance, or you might hear me refer to it as NASCA. We are a local grassroots people movement here in Northern Arizona. We have pretty strong working volunteer groups in Prescott, Cottonwood, Sedona, and Flagstaff, and we're really working on getting into some of those smaller communities up here as well. Our mission is to inform and engage people by raising awareness of the threats of climate change. In order to achieve this, our organization really strives to kind of empower communities and teach residents to become organized and fight for climate change. Our vision is to achieve a sustainable future where people's power really promotes and maintains that healthy environment. And at the same time, we think it's really important to build a society that is both socially and economically equitable during this time. So NASCA is nonprofit and nonpartisan. We're guided by science and social justice, and we're really just about coming together and fundamentally challenging and changing those systems. If you want to become involved or learn about events and outreach, reach out to me afterwards, or I'll put my email in the chat box. And next, I want to introduce Hazel Chandler and have her tell us a little bit about the work that she's been doing.
Hi, it's great to be here. I'm Hazel Chandler, and I'm a consultant that's working with Union of Concerned Scientists. I'm a grassroots organizer here in the state of Arizona. I've lived here a good part of my life, 45 years, I think about now. It's really exciting to be working with the people of Arizona. Union of Concerned Scientists is it's an organization that's standing for science, and says the mission is to make sure that science is taken into account on all the decision making. And we have a number of different programs, but two of the ones that I'm working on are climate and energy, and also stand for our democracy, our Center for Democracy Action. So I just am excited to be able to welcome all of you. I hope that if you're not currently a Union of Concerned Scientists member, you will contact me or sign up, because we have just amazing resources that are available. And one of those is a report that came out just a couple months ago, a month and a half ago, that's COVID-19 collision with the 2020 fire season will ignite multiple threats. I read that report and I just immediately thought we needed to do something in Northern Arizona, because Northern Arizona is one of the most at-risk areas. And so I reached out to Carly Phillips, who is the author of the article and is on staff of Union for Concerned Scientists, and said, would you be willing to do a Northern Arizona webinar? And I also reached out to Carrie and Jenna and others in Northern Arizona and said, you know, would you be willing to co-host? And that's how this all came about. I'm excited. Unfortunately, right now, we probably should have reached out to the southern part of our state as well, because right now the city of Tucson is being, as we speak, partially evacuated or on evacuation notice because of the wildfire. So it's really real. It's a real issue in Arizona, and I'm really excited to have this discussion between Carly and then Tim Carter will speak later. Carly is a Kindle Fellow for protecting carbon in Alaskan boreal forest. With climate, and she's with the Climate and Energy program and Union of Concerned Scientists. Her work focuses on protecting carbon in the boreal forest, and specifically as wildfires increase and threaten those areas, those ecosystems. Dr. Phillips is leading a 2-year collaboration between UCS and the Woods Hole Research Center that combines predictive modeling with economic analysis to weigh the cost of fire suppression against the social cost of large-scale carbon release. Prior to joining UCS, Dr. Phillips studied the carbon cycle in the Arctic ecosystem, and she also worked with the Oden School of Ecology and Center for Permafrost in Copenhagen, Denmark. She also worked in both Arctic Alaska and Sweden, investigating how solar processes respond to rapidly changing climate. Dr. Phillips holds a PhD in ecology from the University of Georgia and a BA in biology from Occidental College. And she grew up in Phoenix, and she loves the Diamondbacks, and her parents still live in Phoenix. So she's kind of an Arizona person, even though she doesn't currently live in Arizona. So I'd like to welcome Carly. We're so thrilled to have you part of this.
Thanks, Hazel. Can folks hear me? Am I choppy or we're good? Awesome. I appreciate the thumbs up. That helps me know. I'm gonna share my screen so that I can show the slides that I prepared. Here we go, and I'm gonna make a big screen. Jenna, could I get a thumbs up that we're all good on the screen as well? Awesome, great. So like Hazel said, my name's Carly Phillips, and I'm going to talk to you today about wildfires, climate change, and COVID. I'm with the Union of Concerned Scientists. Our motto is science for a healthy planet and a safer world. So we're a science advocacy organization that aims to put science in the hands of people who make policy and also encourage scientists to have their voices be heard. And it's been such a cool place to be a part of because there's so much important science going on, and I've gained a real appreciation for how science and scientists themselves can play a role in developing policy and making our country better. And so I'm really excited to share all of that with you today. As Hazel also mentioned, I grew up in Phoenix. My parents still live there. I come out every year and look forward to that time because it's often in the winter, and I'm in Massachusetts right now. So you can imagine that is quite the welcome change when it comes to weather. And in terms of the talk that I'm going to give today, we're going to talk generally about climate science at first. I'll go through that pretty quickly. Then we're going to talk about climate change and wildfires, and also climate change, wildfires, and COVID to really get the threat multiplier. We've been thinking a lot at UCS about how some of these compound hazards, these climate hazards like hurricanes and floods, are going to intersect and really collide with the COVID-19 pandemic. And also thinking about what are the ways that we can prepare both for climate change by adapting and mitigating climate change, but also prepare for the inevitable collision of more of these compound hazards, not just pandemics, but two disasters happening at once. And so with that, we'll start with, oh, can't move the slides. Let's see. Perfect. We'll start with Climate Science 101. And this is from one of my coworkers who took it to the Youth Climate March that was last year in September. And Climate Science 101, we're going to go through the first three really quickly before we start talking about wildfires. First, our world is warming. 2, it's us. 3, we're sure it's us. 4, it's bad. And 5, we have the power to fix it. And so to start, we know that it's warming. We've been measuring, we can measure temperatures throughout these periods of time. And we see, if you can look, this is the anomaly here, the amount of change from average. And you can see that it's going up remarkably fast, and it's continued to expect to rise. In some of the IPCC reports that have come out, they've shown that we've already risen about 1 degree Celsius in terms of global average surface temperature. And the goal now is to keep it between below 1.5 if possible, and certainly below 2 when we're thinking about climate change mitigation. And so we know it's warming. And we also know that it's us. So you can see this is the temperature difference from the average on the y-axis and the year on the x-axis. And this black line that we're seeing right now is the observed temperature increases. If we were to measure things, scientists have spent a lot of time figuring out what is causing these increases. And there are things in the natural world that can do so, things like volcanoes, sunspots, that sort of thing. But when we account for those and use these Earth system models to understand what those temperature changes would look like, you can see in this blue line here that it doesn't match up with what we've observed. But when we start looking at carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases, what we see is that it tracks pretty cleanly with the observed temperatures, suggesting to scientists that human drivers are responsible for the changes that we're seeing. And as I mentioned during the Climate Science 101 slide, we're sure. These are 2 reports, one from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. This was a report that came out in 2018 or 2019 that shows some of the effects that a 0.5 degree Celsius difference in average global surface temperature could make in terms of climate impacts and some of the worst consequences of climate change. There's also the fourth National Climate Assessment, which was put out by the United States government, that details in particular how the United States will be impacted by climate change and also what we can do about it. And in terms of thinking about how bad this can be and what this looks like in our lives, we can zoom into wildfires, where we know that wildfires are getting worse because of climate change, and they're getting worse in a number of ways. First, as you can see here on the y-axis, we have burned acreage in millions of acres. And then on the x-axis, we have years again. And so you can see that over time, we've seen a marked increase in the amount of acreage burned. This is for the continental United States. that we're showing here. And part of the reason that this happens is because with higher temperatures, fuels are drying out and really priming these ecosystems to burn, which can create ignition sources, or rather, create tinder, so that when an ignition sparks, there's much more to go up in flames. Further, there's some interactions with other disasters like beetle infestations that can kill trees and again create these ecosystems that are really ready to burn. The other way that we've seen this playing out is in the size of fires. So this is for fires that are greater than 10,000 acres. The Sawtooth Fire, when I checked this morning, was at about 20,000 acres. That may be dated information. So these are the large fires that are burning huge amounts of land. And on the x-axis, we have the number of those large fires, the number of fires that are over 10,000 acres. And you can see that this is even a more marked increase because we have these fires that are burning larger areas. And part of the reason for that is that when we've suppressed fires, like we have across the Western and Southwestern United States for almost 100 years, what we've done is not only increase the buildup of fuels, which can allow the fires to burn more intensely just because there's more material there, but we've also created a homogeneous forest. There's no longer patchiness like you might have seen in historic forests. So fires can move through the landscape much more quickly and rapidly, and therefore burn a larger area than might have happened in a patchier landscape that had natural fire breaks as part of it. And so scientists are obviously really interested in this because it affects people's lives. I lived in California briefly during some of the wildfire seasons. And like Hazel mentioned, I work in Alaska where there are lots and lots of fires and have experienced what those impacts are like. And so there was a study that came out in 2016 that looked at how much anthropogenic climate change, or how much burned area basically was anthropogenic climate change responsible for. And so you can see a modified version of that figure. This was in the National Climate Assessment, the fourth one that I showed in a previous slide. And what you can see is that climate change is responsible for almost a near doubling in burned area over the past 3 decades. And this is in the Western US. They included part of Texas and North, so they included a large swath of the Western US in this analysis. But you can see how climate change really is responsible for this from their assessment. And one of the things that my research deals a lot with is not only are we seeing these consequences of climate change and wildfires, but wildfires themselves can actually exacerbate climate change because when they burn, they're combusting all this material and releasing CO2, black carbon, and methane into the atmosphere. And we can quantify what that looks like. So this pink graph now, fire emissions on the y-axis in teragrams of carbon, and then a year on the x-axis. The x and y is confusing. And we only have data from 1997 until 2016 for these emissions data. And so you can see here that the continental United States, or CONUS for short, is emitting on average about 20 teragrams of carbon per year. You can see California, which has a highly publicized fire season, is emitting somewhat less. And a lot of this is determined by ecosystem properties. So in California, you may have a lot of above ground biomass. In certain areas, you might have a lot of below ground soil and organic matter that's going to burn off. So that ecosystem type is really important in terms of what those emissions are. I did an analysis with the data set that we have for this to see how Arizona contributed. And I wasn't surprised, given the low carbon content of a lot of the soil in these areas, that Arizona, you can barely see it when it comes up there, right there on the bottom in that bright yellow color. Much lower emissions, in fact, much less than a teragram of carbon every year. And so Arizona is not necessarily contributing to that. But if you're thinking about what are the ecosystems that are causing these much larger releases, I would be I feel like I need to mention Alaska because it's where I work. And in Alaska, we're seeing huge amount of emissions. And so you can see here how much larger the emissions are in Alaska there, and just how much is going into the atmosphere. For perspective, the spike that you see on the far right here, the blue spike over 2015, that's roughly equivalent to 42 million cars, what they release annually. So if you put that into perspective, that's similar to the spike that we're seeing for the continental US that same year. Combined, that's the equivalent of adding an additional, let's say, 75 or 80 million cars to the road. So these fires are contributing huge amounts of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And in that way, they're a little different than some of these climate disasters that we see, like hurricanes, because they're a consequence of climate change in some way, but they're also driving climate change and creating this feedback loop. When thinking about what Arizona's fire season might look like, I'm not sure if any of you have seen these. These are put out by the National Interagency Fire Center. And you can see that in June and July, Arizona is expected, almost the entire state, to have above average fire activity, large fire activity specifically. And then a lot of those concerning areas move to the Pacific Northwest in July and August, which makes sense given seasonality. These are really interesting figures to look at, and they combine a lot of meteorological and ecosystem data to try to understand what is happening in these systems that we see. And obviously, we were talking about before the call started, how many fires are happening in Arizona right now, suggesting that these outlooks are accurate in terms of how they're suggesting the fire season will play out in the Southwest. And so now when we're thinking about what does this mean for COVID-19, how are these climate change intensified wildfires colliding with COVID-19, the pandemic that we are all a part of? You can see here, this is a map from a comment that we published earlier this year, myself and some colleagues at the Union of Concerned Scientists, trying to understand what these different hazards look like. And so you can see wildfires are going to collide with COVID-19 throughout the world. So not just in the United States, but also in Europe, in Siberia. And if you were paying attention to the news at the very end of last year, there was a lot about the Australian bushfires, and they're dealing with the recovery from that in addition to COVID-19. And so there are a lot of ways that these can intersect, and we're going to go through some of the ways that COVID-19 has interrupted, delayed, or modified the current wildfire season that we're entering, and that is about to ramp up. And so the first way that it affects that COVID-19 is colliding with wildfires is from a preparation sense. So there's been fewer risk reduction activities as a result of the pandemic. Prescribed burns, which is what's pictured here on this slide, were stopped for a large part of the US at the outset of the pandemic in March. Some areas have opened them up. I think Arizona is one of those regions. We can hear about that more in the next presentation, I think, but also vegetation treatment, so fuel removal to reduce the fuel loads that suppression has created in those forests. That hasn't happened. In California, we're seeing things like removing the delay of removing vegetation that might be interacting with the power line or at risk of interacting with the power line. And those kinds of preventative measures that are often part of the lead up to a fire season just aren't able to happen in this pandemic environment. And if they are able to happen, they're happening really differently. And the same is true for personnel training. A lot of that has gone virtual. And we're just having to modify in real time the way that we fight fires. The second way that COVID is colliding with wildfires is through pollution. So we have evidence that people in areas with lower air quality, often are at higher risk of contracting and having complications from COVID-19. And so one of the kind of unknowns that we have is how pollution from fires, how that smoke effect might interrupt or exacerbate people's experiences with COVID-19. And that creates a real problem from a public health perspective in terms of how folks are going to prepare and plan for that season. And the last is through practices. And this is in a couple of, and this plays out in a couple of different ways. The practices for emergency management that are often in place are evacuations. If people's homes are threatened by fires, they'll be evacuated to a safer location. That becomes more complicated in the time of COVID-19. Centers would need to be larger, perhaps screen patients, be able to separate people effectively, which oftentimes in this emergency situation and in areas that have already had their emergency management, both budgets and personnel, very much taxed by the pandemic, are now needing to come up with some of these plans. And so it's important that, that governments are thinking about these kinds of things. In addition to the practices in terms of residents and community members, the firefighters themselves may have to change some of their practices in terms of social distancing and changing the way that mealtime happens, changing the way that field camps look, so that the cramped and tight conditions that are often a part of field work and firefighting in general aren't going to contribute to the spread. In addition, there are concerns with having adequate PPE for folks who are firefighting to make sure that they can protect themselves, in addition to protecting all of us through their firefighting efforts. But we can fix this. There are things that we can do to mediate and adapt in these situations. So there has been some legislation introduced that's looking to ensure the health of firefighters and emergency responders during the pandemic. Earlier this week, there was a Senate hearing about wildfire management in the midst of COVID-19. There have been forums about how wildfire operations are going to change and how that might impact vulnerable communities. There are additional pieces of legislation that are looking to invest in health and wildfire prevention, as well as folks pushing to make sure that there's PPE for firefighters, as well as free and prioritized testing for firefighters as well. And so there are things that we can do governmentally to be involved. And there are things that we can do from a climate change perspective to be involved. So there's ways to adapt, which keeps people safe in the current time period. So a couple of examples of those are national forests across Arizona imposing campfire restrictions. So a burn ban. There are also adaptation practices that communities and individual homeowners can take to protect themselves and their community from fire risk. However, on the opposite side, that needs to go hand in hand, those proactive adaptation measures, with mitigation measures that will allow us to reach net zero emissions by 2050, which is what's required if we're to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And so that might be from reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, changing our transportation sector so that cars are emitting less carbon. But these two together, adaptation and mitigation, are how we're not only going to manage the wildfire problem that's come with climate change, the COVID problem that's on top of all of that, but a lot of the challenges that are brought about by climate change can be addressed through these two mechanisms. But in addition to that, going back to science generally and the mission of UCS, there are ways that we can use science to inform these decisions and listen to scientists. So listen to our public health experts when they speak out. Listen to folks who are trying to show us how we can fight climate change, how we can reduce emissions, where those risk areas are. And for me, I think that's one of the most important things that we can do moving forward in terms of protecting ourselves, our families, and our communities, is really listen to the science and let the science guide us. So thank you for listening. I appreciate your time. And that is the end of my presentation. My email address is there if you'd like to follow up with questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carly. That was great. And a lot of things you said really hit home for me, including one of the things I realized when I was younger was I didn't realize how many fires Alaska had, and it's pretty impressive what goes on up there. So we're going to have our next presenter go ahead and start getting his ready. And I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit about him, but I'm sure he'll do a better job than I will. So our next speaker is Tim Carter, and he's here locally with us today. He's been employed with the Coconino County since 2012, and he transitioned to the Emergency Management Department in 2019. So as you guys can imagine, he's a pretty busy guy, and I'll let Tim take it from there. Thank you, Tim.
All right, well, good. Thanks everybody for having me. Good looking group of folks. And I got to tell you, I'm a little upset that I have to follow Carly because clearly she is the scientist in all of this and I am not. So as Jenna said, I work for the Coconino County Emergency Management Department. And we have been extremely busy with both COVID and wildfires. I got a couple of rules. One, if you have questions, please ask. And two, if I give you a dumb joke, you got to just humor me and laugh at it. So, Carly did a great job kind of going into all the science and everything behind all this stuff. I happened to be on the phone yesterday with the Mangum Fire Incident Response Team. The Mangum Fire is about 800 acres burning up on the North Rim right now, just below Jacobs Lake. And really talking to them and kind of hearing what they're doing to kind of combat COVID and how that is really impacting their day-to-day operations. So one thing that they learned, and if this thing will start clicking along, there we go, is kind of what are some of the impacts that locally that we're seeing on some fire stuff, it kind of as the boots on the ground stuff. As Carly mentioned earlier, we have the old way, the fire camps, which were, if you can imagine, covering 2 football fields with tents and having, 1 or 2 firemen per tent, living in extremely close environment. Out in the woods, they're working long hours in poor conditions. Just basic necessities. You have to come in and kind of take a shower either by a hose out behind a building or in a portable shower trailer kind of thing. You can see the smoke in those pictures. They're pretty close to the fire ground and active fire area, so the environmental impacts of that, the air quality is really poor. So when you factor in that exhaustion, that fatigue, and just the heat that they're dealing with every day, it just really taxes the body's immune system. And there's actually, they call it the camp crud. It seems like everybody comes home with kind of a cold or some kind of just junk at the end of a fire that really is wearing down the body's immune system. So when COVID is introduced, obviously that makes things a lot more concerning for medical staff and safety officers there. They've implemented a lot of the same safety precautions that we see on a day-to-day basis, trying to social distance as much as possible. They're actually trying to have a lot of their meetings virtually. So instead of what you see in the top left corner there, instead of having 300 or 400 team bosses and crew leaders in one spot together, they're trying to have those more virtually using technology where possible. But some of the other new ways that things are kind of changing. And before I get into that, I don't know how many of you guys are down in Sedona recognize the decals of a Yavapai County Sheriff's Department car. But that pink stuff is coming out of an aircraft. And unfortunately, this sergeant was calling in an airdrop on his position, and they were right on target. So he changed his brand new car from white to pink. I always loved that picture and wanted to throw that in there. But one thing we're going to start seeing is a more increased use of more expensive air assets. Instead of putting 500 firefighters on one fire, they may put 200 firefighters there and utilizing more aircraft. Aircraft really can only do so much, and they're extremely expensive in our tax dollars to operate. So we're going to see the cost of that go up as these precautions. Another issue is they're looking to no longer hire independent caterers to come in to cut down on the use of utensils and dishes. They're probably going to start giving the old military-style prepackaged rations or the MRE, meal ready to eat packets, which do have a way to kind of heat up meals a little bit, but it's really not the same as a home-cooked meal. We're also, as Carly mentioned, we're looking at training waivers. Actually, one of my interns that's working in our department right now is a wildland firefighter, and they haven't been able to form their team at all until about 2 weeks ago. Usually that starts in February, where they start their annual training and certifications that they're just not doing it this year. We're also seeing some fires that start on local or state lands are going to be left to the locals and the states to do it. The federal government is really going to focus on the life safety aspects of that before they commit any federal resources to help wildfires that aren't on federal lands like they usually do. They're really going to take a closer look at the risk for that, and is this worth putting their already limited personnel out on the fire grounds for that. And then actually for the fires down around Tucson is a good example there. We're going to see a lot more crews placed in hotels instead of fire camps, so they can actually get some social distancing away from each other. I have a good friend who's working for the Type 1 incident management team for the fires down in Tucson, and they've placed the entire team into a hotel down there where normally they would just come in and set up large tents for them, 8 or 10 people in a tent down there at the base camp. They're just not doing that anymore. So one of the big things that they're looking at is a limited availability of resources, but the resources that they are going to use are probably going to really jack up those cost numbers and spend a lot more taxpayer dollar just to avoid COVID. So the big thing for us is in emergency management is what can we do to avoid this even to start? How can we take our own level of preparedness at a individual or household or neighborhood level? And one of the questions that we still get is, well, why should I prepare? What actually do I need to do? And, quite simply, if you look at just the sheer volume of natural forest that we have in northern Arizona is part of the reason why most of us are here. It's a beautiful landscape. Coconino County, 18,000 square miles, second largest county in the nation. Yavapai is at a little over 8,100 square miles. And between the two, we house in whole or in part 6 national forests of about 7.5 million acres. That includes a lot of nationally protected parks and monuments and things like that, Grand Canyon National Park and others. These are resources that are valuable to our communities, our nation, that we want to protect so we can all enjoy them moving forward. But really, because we are in the forests, what can we do to stop wildfires from occurring? And typically, when I talk to groups in person, this is a time when I would love to get great ideas and great answers from people. We should do this, we should do that, and really discuss how we can stop wildfire. But unfortunately, the answer is we can't stop wildfire. It's going to happen. And actually, fire is a naturally occurring part of the ecosystem, whether it be a lightning strike in the monsoon season or a unintended and abandoned campfire. We're going to have wildfire. Unfortunately, there's no way about it. So the best thing that we can do, since we can't stop those fires, is to do our best to mitigate the impacts that they're going to have on our lives. So a couple of things that we recommend are, the individual preparedness. Have your go bags for your family. fancy emergency evacuation kits. Build a first aid kit. What medications, what papers, what do you need if you got a call to evacuate that you could just throw in the car and go. And then also you'll see over on the right-hand side, making sure that your personal property and your yards have those natural defensible spaces. In one thing that I like is there's a couple of landscapers up here in Flagstaff, and I'm sure down in Yavapai County that when they come and take a look at your yard, they can kind of tell you, hey, you should use this plant here, this type of plant here, that are going to be aesthetically pleasing, but also give you that nice buffer zone should wildfire come. Because quite frankly, we've had some fire departments that have said, if it comes down to saving this house or that one, they might have to look at who's done the best job preparing for that. And that's just a sad reality of some of these fires as we begin to build neighborhoods closer into the woods in that urban wildfire interface. One of the other factors and concerns that we really face up here, and I would say this is probably one of the top two between wildfire, is flash flooding and that post-wildfire flooding that can happen. One of those, is, so I will show you this. I'll use a couple of different examples, mostly from Flagstaff because they've happened recently. This is a couple of photos of the soil burn severity from the museum fire that we had here in Flagstaff last year. And then on the left-hand side, if you look closely at the top of that image, you can kind of see the faint pink reddish outline of the burn scar. But we had some hydrology studies done to kind of show if we get monsoon rains, or if there's 3 inches of rainfall, in an afternoon on that burn scar, where's that water going to go and what's it going to do to the communities? So to kind of give you a little reference, this is Mount Eldon, and then you can kind of see the water coming down Mount Eldon, and will hit Mount Eldon Estates neighborhood and then flow down into the Sunnyside neighborhood, which as those of you guys that are in Flagstaff know is very high density neighborhood, a lot of houses in that area, some schools and some infrastructure. So if you've seen a lot of the mitigation work that the county has done with sandbags in that area, this kind of shows why. But on this burn severity map, one thing we look at is, the brighter colors are showing how that soil has burned, how hot it got. Because the hotter the soil burns, it creates this hydrophobic soil. And Carly mentioned some of this earlier, but essentially soil that does not absorb water like it should or like it usually does. We see that when we have these hotter fires that tend to move slower. So as Carly mentioned, we have a lot of fuels on the ground, or forests aren't thinned and it's kind of one big forest instead of patchwork of trees. They're able to kind of burn in one area longer and hotter than they used to. And this essentially creates some cooling gases in the soil that as those gases cool off, they kind of create a waxy coating in the soil, which makes them repel water instead of absorb it in as they go. Causes that water to flow downhill faster and deeper than it normally would. And in my non-scientific brain, the best way I've heard it described was if we had a glass of sand and poured water in there, that sand is going to absorb that water pretty quickly, pretty well. But if you put a lot of heat to that sand, as we know, that sand will eventually turn to glass, and glass does a great job of repelling water instead of absorbing it in. So it creates a potential for a lot of post-wildfire flooding concerns, and kind of changes a lot of the way that water used to flow. It will now flow in areas that it used to not. So in 2018, this is another example, we had the North Schultz area flooding. And this is out on the eastern side of of the San Francisco Peaks, right off Highway 89. Brandis Way is a road that's up there at the kind of the very top of Timberline. We had 5.5 inches of rain in just over 3 hours time during a July monsoon storm. So This is after, if you guys remember the Schultz fire back in 2010, the county, we received a lot of state and federal money to do a lot of infrastructure upgrades and things like that to help with that flooding. And that went on for many, many years. So 8 years after that, we had this North Schultz flooding. That you see the picture on the left, that's a 4-foot box culvert that a road goes over. So that water is clearly rushing and it's overtopped a 4-foot box culvert. The picture over on the right-hand side is from the drainage ditches that ADOT and the county had put in along the state highway, anywhere between 4 and 6 feet deep. But you can see they're full, and they're pretty much full rushing rivers at this time. These are a couple other pictures of the damage, and I'll start with the one on the right. So if you look at the larger photo on the right, this is looking from Brandis Way, kind of looking back north towards the San Francisco peaks, and that shines right up into the Schultz fire burn scar. You can tell there's nothing green on that mountain. This is 8 years after that fire had gone through, with a lot of reseeding and soil work up there. We still saw these incredibly massive floods. If you look over next to those pieces of construction equipment, that debris in the channels, those are actually concrete skirts and mats that essentially, if you take concrete blocks and wire them together with steel rope, that the water has gone through and picked those up and kind of discarded them and kind of thrown them out of the way. There's actually a couple of other photos from up where that dump truck is, and I didn't include the photo where that mat has completely been picked up and thrown over the top of the road. So if you look over on the left-hand side, you can kind of see some of those 4-foot culverts. That tree that's kind of right in the middle on the top left is about the diameter of a telephone pole. Public Works was telling us most of those boulders were in the 150 to 300 pound range. And then you can see at that bottom bottom left-hand corner, excuse me, you can kind of see some of that mat that's still down there on the ground next to that. So huge pieces of equipment, huge infrastructure, extremely heavy, that was honestly no problem for these flood waters to move out. These are waters that we are kind of looking at and anticipating that could hit downtown Flagstaff, or the east side of Flagstaff, through the heart of Sunnyside neighborhood after the museum fire, which is why, again, you've seen the over 6,000 feet of linear barrier that we have out there, and over 500,000 sandbags have been placed around for homeowners and things like that to kind of help protect some of that property from the rain that we're expecting to get this monsoon season. So obviously these are, this fast moving water is extremely troublesome for us. It is definitely something that that has taken life in Flagstaff before, and it's something that we take very seriously and want everyone to be aware of, that these are probably two of the biggest dangers that we face in Flag annually. So I would probably be run out of my department forever if I didn't make a pitch for the emergency notification system. So how do we notify our communities of dangers that we face, and kind of what those what hazards are coming and what they may look like? And the counties, both Coconino and Yavapai, have notification systems that do that. They're both free systems that are open to the public. Locations or notifications can be countywide, or we can isolate them to a very specific area of the county. They can include things from severe weather, natural man-made disasters, or really anything that's going to pose a threat to the general public or severely disrupt kind of your normal operations, your normal business throughout your day. The main differences are purely cosmetic, and that's that my department here in Coconino County maintains the system for Coconino. Down in Yavapai County, you guys have a system also, but that's just maintained by the Sheriff's Department. They both pretty much do the exact same thing and can send out the exact same messages. So I would encourage you guys to sign up for those. You can get messages from them through various forms of social media. They'll send out emails, phone calls, text messages. If you're up here in Flagstaff or in Coconino County, You may see one of the messages that we send out a good bit is anytime the National Weather Service issues like their red flag warning or something like that, they will broadcast that message out, and we will send it out through our system to various devices. I have gone in and kind of actually changed it to where now you don't get a phone call at 3 in the morning if they go out, because I don't like waking people up unless it's an emergency, but you will get it through email and text message and things like that. So again, take a look at those. It's a great way to get life-saving information quickly. So how would you register? Hopefully you guys, if you've been around Coconino County, have seen this bumper sticker or sign somewhere. It's very simple. Just go to that coconino.az.gov/ready, or you can Google Coconino County Emergency Management, and it'll take you right to that. If you go through there, take about 5 minutes, fill out the form, and you're good to go. You guys down in Yavapai, if you'll just go to YCSO's webpage, they've got a link on there through their community notifications, and get you signed up down there as well. When you register, you may get notifications that say they're either titled "We're in the ready position," "We're in the set," "We're in go." Recently, the state of Arizona, all 15 sheriffs decided that they were going to use common language for emergency messaging. So if you're traveling to Tucson and get an alert, or if you're in Yuma or Flagstaff or Apache County, those messages should all be roughly the same. And they adopted the Ready, Set, Go program, which is coordinated through the Arizona Information Network. Their web page is down there below, and I would encourage you guys to go look at that. A whole lot of preparedness information there. But this, in a nutshell, is we're always in a state of ready. So you have that go bag packed. It's in the closet by the front door. We're going about life. It's blue skies. Everything is great. But as soon as we have that fire that might be near your area and you might need to evacuate, the sheriff may issue a notification that puts your neighborhood in that set stage. And that's kind of where they want you to be ready to evacuate, bring that bag out, maybe put it in the backseat of the car just in case. Because when they tell you to go, that's not a time to start packing up. That's a time to hit the road and safely get out of the warning area. So you may see this information for Ready, Set, Go. Again, encourage everybody to go kind of take a look at that and read up on that. So very quickly, there's a couple of resources. Again, you can feel free to check out our webpage, the Coconino County Emergency Management or the Yavapai County Emergency Management. Check out the Sheriff's Department down in Yavapai County for their notifications, and then the Arizona Emergency Information Network. A lot of great resources for individual and family preparedness and things like that. So that is all I've got. There's my email address, my office and cell phone lines. I really appreciate the time, and I know I kind of zoomed through a lot of information at once for the sake of time, but really appreciate it and look forward if you guys have any questions, fire away and let us know.
Thank you so much, Tim. That was great. And I know for those of us who have got that evacuation call, I thought I was prepared, but you can never really be prepared as you think you are when you get that. Pet crates, all your important documents. It's a great thing to really take seriously, especially here in Arizona. So I appreciate that call, and also that you mentioned the fire crud, because that is a real thing from personal experience, not just what we call the coffee at fire camp. So you guys, there's not too many questions in the chat box, but we can start going through those and then open it up for some live questions as well. So I'll kind of let Carly and Tim kind of decide who wants to answer each question, or maybe both contribute a little bit if that works for you guys. So this first question I see is from Jim Gale, who's in Sedona, and he's asking, how would you describe the pinyon pine forest around Sedona vulnerability to fire? How can we be best prepared? And what causes beetle infestation for the pinyon pine? And is there anything we can include in climate action planning? Sedona is working on a climate action plan for their city, and so they're taking public input. So I'm sure Jim's going to use some of this great information you provided. So go ahead, whoever would like to kind of step in first.
Feels like a Tim question to me.
Yeah, that's Jim.
You know, and I was going to say that feels like a Carly question to me. As far as the, how would I describe it? I mean, it's, I think all the national forests up here have done a pretty good job with the financial resources they have to try and do as much forest restoration as they can, and kind of clearing out some of that undergrowth. Is there work to be done? Absolutely. We are nowhere near being as prepared as where we need to be. And I'm not sure how many billions of dollars that would take to be. So there's always work to be done. Is that something that is a high fire area? I'm not 100% sure, because most of that area is going to be in the Yavapai side, which I don't get down to see a whole lot. But how can you be best prepared? Again, I would encourage, probably one of the best things would be to talk to your neighbors and kind of have a neighborhood, not really coalition, but just kind of a group you can go around and kind of help each other prepare that defensible space in your own yards, and really work to help each other out. And that can kind of help inside the neighborhoods. If your personal property should back up to some state or federal lands, and perhaps reach out to those entities, either the state Department of Forestry and Fire Management and or the U.S. Forest Service, and kind of see what they can offer, what resources they can offer for those buffer areas, and just to kind of help you prepare as best that you can. I'm sure they would love the help.
Great. Thank you, guys. I know that was a lot of questions. So I have another question, and then we will have Steve from Sedona ask a live question, but the one before that is from Robert, and it says, does the state or county produce a fire hazard severity map, and how often is it updated?
You know, I have seen it's a great question. I've seen one. I'm not sure if that is a state thing or if that is a federal thing. I've actually seen one for the Coconino National Forest that I think those guys did recently. I would say, I'm trying to think what date, don't quote me, but I know that once they started the big 4 forest restoration initiative between the 4 big national forests up here, they created some. And then typically after most major fires, they'll take a look at it and make any revisions for that. I would say your best bet to get one of those is to try the State Department of Forestry and Fire or U.S. Forest Service for whatever national forest is closest to where you are. That would probably be my suggestion for those.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tim. And I will also kind of save this chat and I can look into it. No promises, but if I can find some good information, I'll send out a follow-up email so everyone has access to that information. So, Steve, I think you have a question for us. You'll have to unmute yourself though, Steve. I probably have you muted, but I think you can take it off there.
Jenna?
Sorry, Steve, I probably was
There you are.
remuting you.
No? Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Thank you, Jenna. I do have a question and also a comment question for Carly. I really appreciated the chart you showed displaying the relative magnitude of carbon contribution of various geographic areas, fires like Arizona and continental United States and Alaska, I think you showed. I would love to see on that same chart contribution comparison with other areas like Siberia, where it just has massive fires right now, and they have fires there, I understand, burned year round that just continues burning. And say last year's Australian fires, how does that compare with, say, Alaska and or the Brazilian rainforest fires. If you see all of that together compared with, say, Arizona. So that's just a comment. And my question for Tim or Carly is the impact of the fire risk for me as a homeowner in Sedona. We're lucky to live in this beautiful urban forest all around, and I could just visualize a massive wildfire that would burn through here and destroy hundreds of homes like we've seen in California and other places. So the impact for me is, even if there's never a fire, it's going to be increased insurance rates, because I'm positive that if nobody else is paying attention, at least the insurance industry is. So do you guys have any idea of increased insurance? At some places in California, they can't get insurance at all, I understand, for fire. How is that impacting Sedona and Flagstaff in our area, insurance rate?
You know, Steve, that's a great question. And you're absolutely right. There are insurance companies, yeah, they look at the bottom dollar, and it's a risk versus reward kind of thing for them. I'm not really sure how that is impacting rates here, but I would imagine that it would. And I don't know, you know, it would almost, you mentioning it would almost mean you get a safe driver discount on your car insurance because you haven't had a wreck. I almost wonder if there's insurance companies that would kind of do something similar for neighborhoods that decide to be a fire-wise neighborhood, and, you know, reaching out and actually making those defensible spaces throughout their community. That might be something that you would want to talk to Sedona Fire about, to see if that's something that if you and your neighbors wanted to actually participate in, they can probably get you started on that.
Good point, thank you.
Wonderful, that was a great question, Steve. All right, our next question is from Andrew, and it is addressed to Carly. So it says, parts of South America are actively burning forests to make way for crops. Does the carbon from those massive fires make its way to the US?
That's a great question, and also gets to Steve's point of how do these fire emissions compare to other things. Depending on the emissions of any given country, fire emissions can be more than what a country emits otherwise. So the example that comes to mind is in British Columbia, the province of Canada. In 2017 and 2018, they had huge fire years where over 1 million hectares were burned just inside the province. And that released about 3 times the amount of carbon that all of their normal activities do. And those forests are higher north, and so there's more carbon below ground in the soil that can burn and be released from there. So I don't think that would be the case for some states, but just as an example, it can be a huge amount. And getting to the question, the carbon from the massive fires makes it to the US. I'm going to answer that question in 2 ways. First, for the carbon dioxide and other gases that go into the atmosphere, those are going to go up and then be well mixed within the atmosphere. And so in that sense, carbon is carbon to the atmosphere and to us. It's going to be mixed in and kind of globally distributed. So fires that emit carbon in Brazil, let's say, that carbon is going to impact climate warming that happens both in Massachusetts and in Arizona. But an interesting nuance to that question, I guess, is that smoke can travel super far. And while I can't speak for the smoke in South America, again, I always go north because that's where most of my research is. There are fires in Alaska and fires kind of throughout the Alaska-Canada range there in the boreal zone, where black carbon from those fires has been found on the ice in Greenland and is responsible for the accelerated melt of Greenland. And similarly, they've also found in some of the really large fire years in Alaska that there has been smoke that's moved down to the lower 48 as well. So while I can't speak to your question specifically with South America, there is transport of greenhouse gases and also smoke and other particulate transfer that can move really far, much farther than I ever expected.
Great answer. Great question as well. There's more good questions coming in. So this one is really important question, and it's addressed to both of you, and it's from Debbie. And she says, how do you account for getting alerts to our most vulnerable populations? Those over 75, many who don't have smartphones, limited English, those with disabilities, and those in mobile homes or mobile home parks. How do they get evacuated if they can't get themselves out?
Oh, Debbie, I wish I could give you a hug for this question. This one is near and dear to my heart. So one of the great features about the Coconino County Emergency Notification System is when you're registering in there, you're able to put in a lot of information about, if there's anyone that lives in the residence that has access and functional needs, is someone in a wheelchair, or are they bedbound? Do they have specific medical equipment that has to go with them, like portable oxygen, that kind of thing? Do you need assistance with evacuations? There's a couple of hundred different things that you can select in there to say yes. And what that allows us to do is, and I'll use the museum fire, for the Sunnyside neighborhood, or really any neighborhood or any area of Coconino County. If I know that I've got a 30-minute window before that water is going to hit, I can pull up my laptop, I can pull up the phone, and I can draw a circle around that area, and I can say, who's going to need help? And it will pinpoint on a map in there, and it kind of shows me every address of someone, and I can scale it down to who's going to need help with, with medical equipment transportation, who just needs a ride. So if you just need a ride, can I get someone to go pick you up? Can I get one of the city buses to swing by? Or where should I coordinate those collection points? Someone that is on, more serious medical issues, do they need EMS support? So I can actually direct EMS, go to 123 Main Street. This patient there will likely need this, 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 and this. So it's a great resource for us to be able to really drill down and help those people that really need that. Limited English is another thing that when you register in the system, you're able to select your preferred language from about 15 or 20 different languages of the more popular, more common ones. And so notifications will be sent in that language. They're automatically translated before they're sent so that you'll receive that in your native language. And I can't speak completely to the Yavapai system, but I will say for the Coconino system, an email is not required to register, only a phone number. So you can go in and register your address and your landline phone number, and you're good to go, because you're right. Some people just don't have email. They don't want it. My grandparents, there's no way, no how they're going to get online for an email address. So, mobile home parks are the same way. You can kind of drill down your address to be 123 Main Street, space 21. So it really gives us a very detailed GPS location of where that residence is, to kind of give us some tools that we could help those with access and functional needs as best as we can.
Great news, and definitely a great question. I see Debbie giving the thumbs up, so that's a good sign for you. All right, next question is from Peggy, and it's kind of similar to what Steve was asking as well. Should Sedona volunteers mobilize to clear some of the defensible space on federal land that borders and or is within city limits? So I don't know if you guys know of some groups maybe, or something to talk to her about that do that work.
So I would suggest, should you mobilize? I would say yes, but. And what comes in, I would definitely make sure, I would find out who owns that land, whether it is federal or if it's city or state, or kind of who owns that, and talk to them and kind of see what their plans are. I have found that a lot of these entities are extremely willing and grateful for a lot of help within limits. I definitely would not just go out and start clearing without letting them know. They tend to frown on that sometimes. But I think that's where that meaningful dialogue with that entity comes in. It kind of says, this is what we want for our neighborhood and our area. How can we help accomplish this? And having worked with a lot of the state and federal forestry staff in Northern Arizona, most of them are always willing to sit down and discuss that, and really do appreciate the community input and willingness to step up. So I would definitely reach out to them and get that ball rolling. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of times too, they plan sometimes years in advance when they're going to work on an area, just because funding is low. So they might actually have plans, and they do love volunteers, as Tim said. So they might be able to give you a date, and then we could start kind of helping them find volunteers. So great question, Peggy.
I just want to add that in some cases, neighborhood people have actually dumped their trimmings onto the forest land on the other side of the fence. So you have this, pile of flammable stuff just left there. And on some trails right here in West Sedona, you can see a lot of stuff, not necessarily dumped, but trees that have died, and maybe some of the larger stuff isn't going to burn so fast, but then all the brush is growing up around it. I will pursue it.
And she will do so. I know her. Wonderful, Peggy. And then I'm still going through this chat. Wonderful. For those of you that were kind of following along with Robert's question, it looked like Selena is way ahead of me, and she provided a link for those of you who are interested to a National Wildfire Coordinating Map. So thank you so much. And then looks like Stefan kind of helped Carly kind of refer back to the atmospheric mixing between North and South America. So thank you so much, Stefan. He kind of has a better idea, I think, of kind of how our air is circulating there, and gave a great answer. He said only small mixing of atmosphere between South and North America, because there's only a small amount of mixing between the northern and southern hemispheres. So wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. So we have a question from Andrew, and it says, in terms of our area, is the idea of the big one wildfire a myth, or is a huge, unimaginably, lots of huges in there, actually possible? Great question. I'm from Washington, and my bosses in fire every year, we're talking about the big one, and I think these guys could maybe kind of answer those fire cycle questions more relevant to Arizona. So
I'll take a stab at it. And this is from a completely unscientific viewpoint, but if you remember the campfire from a couple of years ago over in Paradise, were any of those folks over there thinking that fire could happen, that it could occur? And unfortunately it did. There were I want to say 80, 85, 86 fatalities in there, and caused billions of dollars of damage and wiping communities off the map. And I think for us, could we see a fire of that proportion? I don't know. But I think one of the concerns we have is, since we live in the great outdoors, is for me, I kind of say this: we live in nature's world, not nature in ours. So can we have a large fire? Absolutely. Is there plenty of fuel and vegetation to burn? Absolutely. Would it wipe the towns off the map? I don't know. But I would rather not find out. So that's kind of what we work on in emergency management. Now, if there's something more from a scientific standpoint, I will punt that over towards Carly and let her take a stab if needed.
I have one quick comment to add. One of the other things that we found that's increasing with climate change is fire weather that really can contribute to aggressive spread. So in addition to some of the fuel stuff that I've talked about, the conditions for fire spread, the number of days of those conditions during any given fire season are increasing across the Western US. So again, not a direct answer to your question, but in terms of the conditions, there is some evidence to suggest that conditions that may worsen fires are increasing in frequency under climate change.
Thank you both. I know Stephanie made a comment earlier, is always talking about the wind, and myself being new to Arizona, I am blown away by the wind here. So I mean, that's a huge deal, and I don't know for those of you who've lived here a long time if it's getting worse or not, but that is a huge factor for these major fires, and they make it very unsafe for people to be trying to put them out there. So great question and great answers. So a couple more comments. Steve wants all of you to know, if any of you are the ones dumping that out there in the woods, that there are some yard cleanup events that happen in Sedona. And I know I'm kind of up here towards Flagstaff, and my neighborhood has some as well. So that might be some great information that we can start getting out to people to hopefully prevent that. And then I want to open it up to Shay, who has a comment and a question. Let's see.
Gotta unmute myself. Okay, full disclosure, I am running for the Corporation Commission, so I just want to put that in there as well as, but I have a comment and a question for Tim, and this is going to help me on my campaign too. Thank you, Tim. Fire-wise, I'm going to tell Steve, I owned property in Prescott for a number of years up in on the Prescott National Forest. And what our neighborhood did was we applied for a Firewise grant every year. And so what happens with that is, and of course we got it every year. And so what that was about was, if you could not, as a homeowner, and a lot of summer properties were up there, as a homeowner, clear your lot for some reason, the grant would provide funds to get your lot cleared for you. So in that position, we were right there on the edge of that Yarnell fire here a few years ago, sadly. And it didn't come over the ridge to Highland Pines, but it definitely went down the other side. So that might be something that a group of you in your homeowners area could get together and investigate, either with the fire department, and see if you guys can get a hold of that. So that's huge. And yes, you do get a break. If you're a Firewise community, you do get a break on your homeowner's insurance. So that was a real incentive for all of us to do that. Anyway, to Tim, I'm hearing about I get lots of questions on biomass and generating electricity from biomass and wanting to go that way for Northern Arizona. My question is there any coordinated effort in the forest thinning and cleaning with the Forest Service or the Park Services or the area up there? Is there any idea of moving in that direction for you all to get a plant up there?
Great question. And I don't want to steer you wrong, so I will say I don't know. What I do know is I have seen some discussion through, just through local media and stuff that I want to say last fall, the university, either NAU or, working with the county and state forestry, they were working to kind of look at the feasibility for logistically and economically of sending some of the wood chips from these forest restoration groups, sending them to, I think it was South Korea for some of the biomass removals. And I don't know a lot of info about it. That's just something that my department doesn't really have a lot to do with. I could get you, if you would like, I can get you in touch with probably the Public Works Forest Restoration Director, Jay Smith. He can probably get you some more info on that, or definitely the county manager's office. I know they were looking into that. I don't know if that's something that would come here or what. I just, thankfully, that is outside of my daily purview.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, like I said, I get a lot of questions from Northern Arizona, and there's a lot of controversy around it as well. Because one is in some communities, they're actually cutting forests to feed their plant to generate electricity, which is a huge no-no. But on the other hand, is there a way to supplement your grid up there by coordinating an effort to get all the thinning, the forest, the community stuff that is going on up there to a place that, at least if it didn't operate all the time, it could operate some of the time? And then the other piece of that is getting a closed system so it doesn't create carbon as the stuff is burning, because there are systems that are more expensive that it's an interior system that does not release smoke into the air. It keeps everything contained. So yeah, so that's kind of that's kind of where I'm going with all of this. I'm trying to do my homework.
I appreciate you mentioning kind of keeping that closed system and emissions and less smoke in the air. One thing the county is doing, last year we purchased an air curtain burner system that we've begun to use for some of our controlled kind of green waste disposal areas. At this point, it processes things a lot slower than a prescribed burn will, and we've got, I think, more media that needs to be disposed of than that machine can handle. But what we're trying to do is on projects, especially projects near neighborhoods, we use this system. And if you're not familiar with it, it's actually a really ingenious system that it pretty much resembles a construction dumpster that we can take, branches and debris and drop that inside that dumpster. And in my unscientific description, the best way to describe it is if, when you go into the 7-Eleven down in Phoenix in the summertime, as soon as you open the door, you've got the giant air conditioners that blow down on you and keep the cool air in. They kind of put a similar thing that blows across the top that once they start the fire and start burning the material inside this container, it keeps that smoke inside the container and reburns the particles in the smoke. So what comes out is an extremely clean, it doesn't have a lot of the byproduct and the smoke and all the pollution that normally comes out of that. That's something that we're really trying to use as much as we can, and actually have it working this week out around the parks community here just west of Flagstaff.
Oh, interesting. I have a friend that has property in parks.
Oh, nice.
I'll ask him about that. Yeah, actually he was up there this weekend cleaning his defensible space with the tractor. Because actually I volunteer on my campaign, so I pay attention to when he's out of town.
Right.
Yeah, but good. Thank you. That gives me two people to get a hold of, and the air curtain burner is a good one to research. Yeah, that's great. That's great news. And just one more comment, Jenna. Yes, I am a native here, almost. I moved here in '57. The wind on the Kaibab Plateau drives me nuts.
I feel you.
Yes, it's not you.
Good news, I guess. All right, so we'll try to get through a couple more questions in the next few minutes. I know our presenters have more meetings to get to, so thank you both for being here. Let's see if I didn't lose my spot here. So I know Robert has a question. Would you like to go ahead, Robert?
Yes, please. Thank you. My name is Bob Leiter, and I'm actually live in San Diego County and a retired urban planner that's been doing research on wildfire hazards in Southern California and working with the scientists at Scripps Institution of Oceanography on a research report on this topic. So I appreciate the opportunity to listen into your discussion. I had put in a question regarding whether either the state of Arizona or the counties produce what we call a wildfire hazard severity map. And I saw Delina's response, but what the map is that's produced in California by CAL FIRE is it's a severity map which more or less predicts the likelihood of severe wildfires based on evaluation of climatic conditions and vegetation and topography. And it's an official map, similar in a lot of ways to a floodplain map that FEMA sets standards for it. And the reason I brought that up is that in California, those maps are being used for a lot of different purposes, including being referred to by insurance companies when they have, in fact, been canceling fire insurance policies. The town I live in, several homeowners have had their fire insurance canceled because they're located in a high fire hazard area. And unfortunately, the state hasn't updated these maps since 2008. So, and they haven't done any analysis of the potential impacts of climate change on the severity and the likely severity and frequency of wildfires. So my question to you all, and I think I know the answer, is it doesn't sound like in Arizona there is that sort of an official state hazard severity map, and therefore you do look at, in trying to predict where fires might occur, you look more at historical locations of fires and perhaps some other factors. But there is quite a bit of, in California, there's quite a bit of focus on improving the mapping systems for wildfire severity and the policy implications of those.
So Robert, I was, as we were talking, I was just looking to make sure that I didn't misspeak, and I might have. I just looked at the DFFM, the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management website, and there is a wildfire risk assessment portal for the state that kind of has that. And if you'll take a look over in the chat, I did throw the link in there.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure if that's what you're looking for, but I think that maybe the closest that we have on a state level might be going in the right direction.
I'll take a look at that. And, you know, I would say that the questions about the effects on fire insurance and some of the other important impacts of wildfires on communities are the research that's being done to update these maps is viewed as perhaps providing some real benefits to communities and to the private sector in the way that they approach insurance and investments. And so it is I think it's a very important topic that you all are discussing today.
Wonderful. So thank you. Let's get at least maybe one more question in, and then also you guys all have mine and Hazel's email address. I know the presenters, I think, provided theirs as well, and not to speak for them, but I can also try to help answer any questions we missed, and they are maybe willing to as well. So we'll make sure to put those in the chat box one more time for you guys. But I know there was a question kind of directed at Hazel, but I will have her kind of address that one. And let's get this question from Debbie is great, and it's for both of the presenters. And it says, can you explain how increased temperatures and drought increase the vapor pressure deficit and contribute to the intensity, frequency, and size of wildfires? What is the relationship of wildfires to VPD?
Vapor pressure deficit.
I am going to say I do not know that, but I know where I can find the information to answer your question. So I will put my information in the chat box if you would like to get in touch and talk about that more. Unless, Tim, do you have the...
I can make something up and make it nowhere near correct, so I better not.
Good one, Debbie. Yes, great question. And yeah, like I said, I can try to, maybe if Carly sends me that information in the next couple days, I'll try to get out a follow-up email to everyone who was here, and feel free to reply and let me know if your questions were answered or not, and we'll definitely try to get that to you. All right, I'm seeing more stuff pop in. Peggy, do you want to quickly ask your question and then we will wrap it up? Thank you so much, you guys. Oh,
Okay, let's see.
sorry, Peggy, I could.
I just wanted to ask Tim if Sedona could borrow that piece of equipment and set it up here, because they're already advertising that they want people to bring their yard waste over to the city yard for disposal, to make sure that our yards are fire safe. And the last time they did it a few weeks ago, they had a dumpster over at the fire station which filled up in one day, and then they brought another one that filled up in the next day. I think there's an awful lot of stuff here, and I would like to see us not be frustrated in our attempts to clean our yards and be efficient and prepare. And we can use all the help we can get, because I think we're really here in a little bubble of unawareness. And if people can really awaken to our sitting duck scenario that we have here in terms of fire and get some support, it would really be great to get people activated. It would be inspiring.
Great question. What, if you don't mind me asking, if you know, what does Sedona usually do with all of the yard waste that people drop off?
That's what I don't know. I don't know if they chip it up. I don't know if they bring it to the landfill in Clarkdale, or the landfill over on the other side of Mingus Mountain. I mean, those are possible volcanic spots for, hot spots in my mind, for all that stuff to be left there under the conditions that we're having with wind and with the heat and the background heat. So.
Sure. Actually, to answer your question, I will have to play dumb again and say I don't really know. That is coordinated through our Public Works Department. I can definitely reach out to the Public Works Director and kind of ask if that is something that could be used, and kind of what that might look like. And then I will, hopefully if I can get a response back here in the next couple of days, I will send that over to Jenna so she can pass that along. But I agree. I think personally that would be, a great resource to be able to use for that. And I know the state has got a couple of them, and some of the national forests have a couple of them as well. So, there's certain requirements that we have. It's got to have someone trained to operate it, and takes a piece of heavy machinery to load it and all that kind of stuff. But I like where you're going with that. And I will definitely reach out and try to get some info and report back as soon as
I'm really into the sharing of equipment, and we are in the middle of the national forest. We have national forest like right in our backyards. We are in, and so there's a level of responsibility that the government has to protect us with how they manage our space, to protect the national forest space.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We're waiting here to cooperate.
Cool. I will see what I can find out for you for sure.
That's good. Thank you so much.
Well, we said that we were going to go for about an hour and a half, and we've gone for about an hour and a half. I can't thank Carly and Tim and Jenna and all of you that have joined us enough. This has been an incredible dialogue. The depth of the questions have been really, really amazing. I don't know about anybody else, but I've learned so much. And it just shows me how much work we have to do in Arizona, that when we all come together, when we share our information, not only information within communities, but across communities and across the state, and bring in our experts like Carly and put them on the same in the same webinar with our people that are handling our disaster preparedness in our communities. This is just a really rich conversation. So I really, really hope that we can continue more conversations like this and do more webinars. And I really want to thank you on behalf of Northern Arizona Climate Change Alliance and Union of Concerned Scientists and Elders Climate Action and other groups that have helped sponsor this. I really want to thank everybody for being here, and this has been amazing.
Thank you all. Thank you, Hazel. Thank you so much, Carly and Tim. And like Hazel said, you were quite the audience. You kept them on their toes, and we appreciate you guys asking all those hard questions. So thank you all. Enjoy your afternoon, and I promise I will be in touch. So take care.
Thanks.
Have a good day, everybody.
Bye-bye.